This is Holly Page with this week's edition of No Labels Talks. I'm here with the rabbi of the problem-solving politics, Ryan Clancy. I like it.
You do, Rabbi?
Yeah, good
There
Irish
are,
Catholic kid.
there are many rabbis named Ryan Patrick Clancy in the world, I'm sure.
Exactly. We're no labels, Ryan. There you go. What a great conversation we have for our listeners today.
Yes, really a tremendous leader, somebody who more than a few people in our movement would like to be president one day. And I think they are right to feel that way. Bill McRaven, just formerly led the University of Texas system, more notably led special force operations, including the missions to capture Saddam Hussein and get Osama bin Laden and rescue Captain Phillips. So not a bad resume.
Not a bad
Little better than mine.
As I was listening to the conversation, I was just thinking how important it is for us to promote and make aware folks like Admiral McRaven to model integrity, and I think I mentioned this before, but when we did the memorial service for Senator Lieberman, my son volunteered for that event and stayed to listen to the whole thing. And I don't think we talked about it afterwards. I don't think he was aware that at one point in time, there was a politics that wasn't about name calling and goading into online warfare, that there really was and still is a class of people who operate from, a place of personal integrity and public integrity. So more of that, please.
Well, the good news is, that obviously is in short supply in our political system. It is not in short supply in lots of other areas of American public and private life. So I think it's just a matter of getting more of that back into politics, which has been chased out of there for all kinds of reasons. Of course, one of the things Admiral McRaven gets asked about and has a great answer about is, why more people like him don't run for politics. And he walks people through what it takes and what you put your family through. And, it's a bit of a circus, and you can understand why capable people prefer to tap out of that option.
Absolutely. Even if they personally are willing to take the incoming, they don't want to subject their family to it.
Right.
And I think it's one of the reasons why we have to prevail in our effort to rebalance and refocus our political conversation, because we have to make government safe for sane, normal people who don't want to subject their families to unbelievable scrutiny, make it safe for them to serve.
Right. Well, he had so much perspective on the different challenges we're facing abroad. He was just in Ukraine earlier this year, thoughts on China, on the situation in the Middle East, on our readiness situation. He even had a very surprising answer to the question of what is the most pressing security challenge you think is facing in the United States. I won't say what it is. You got to listen to that to get the answer, but it's not what you think.
All right. Well, listen, I think Marianne thinks we've talked too long as it is, so you better get right to the podcast.
Did she send the tase
Yes,
through your laptop too? Yeah,
yes.
I just got the shock.
I know.
Marianne runs a very tight ship.
She does. God bless her. All right. So here is this week's edition of No Labels Talks with Admiral Bill McRaven.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Andy Bursky. I'm on the executive board of No Labels. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us. We have the privilege today of having as our guest Admiral William McRaven. Admiral McRaven is one of the good guys. We don't have enough of them, but it's certainly great that we have him as a great patriot, a great leader, both in the military and in academia, a great thinker and a great friend of No Labels. Bill McRaven is retired U.S. Navy 4-star admiral. He was the former chairman of the University of Texas system. During his time in the military, he commanded special operations forces at every level, eventually taking charge of U.S. Special Operations Command. His career included combat during Desert Storm and both the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. He commanded the troops that captured Saddam Hussein and rescued Captain Phillips. Admiral McRaven is also credited with developing the plan and leading the Osama bin Laden mission in 2011. The Admiral is a recognized national authority on U.S. foreign policy and has advised Presidents George Bush, Barack Obama, and other U.S. leaders on defense issues. It's our honor, my personal honor, to welcome him today to address the No Labels community at such an important time in our history. Now let me turn it over to Ryan Clancy. Ryan.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Admiral, for being with us today.
You bet. Happy to join you, Ryan. And Andy, thanks for that very kind introduction.
So, Admiral, a week out from the election, everybody's talking politics, but what we want to talk about is what happens next and what the new president, whoever it is going to inherit. And I want to start here by asking you a very simple question, which is this. What, in your view, is the top national security risk facing the United States today?
Well, thanks, Ryan. And let me also just thank No Labels for hosting this event this afternoon. As Andy pointed out, we are at a critical time in our history in the United States, and I'm always happy and have been proud to be associated with No Labels. So thanks for hosting this. When I was the chancellor of the University of Texas system, and I would talk to alumni and donors and large groups, invariably, based on my background, somebody would pose this question, Ryan. They would say, what do you think is the #1 national security threat out there? And they always thought I was going to say something like Iran or North Korea or maybe even Russia. And my answer was always the same, K through 12 education. And then they would say, no. I mean, what's the #1 national security threat? And I would say K through 12 education. And my point was that if we weren't raising young men and women to think critically, to have the STEM skills, to understand other ideas around the world, if we weren't teaching them and educating them in a way that was going to make them great national security leaders 20 years from now, then we were undermining, the world in terms of our national security hopes. So it really is this idea that we've got to find a way to improve our educational system, particularly K through 12. Now, the fact of the matter is we have the best university system in the world, bar none. 8 of the top 10 universities are here in the United States. But our K through 12, always on the PISA reporting, really is a lot lower than where we need to be in terms of math and science and reading and the things that are truly critical. So my hope is that, wherever you might be in this community, take the opportunity to get engaged, to make sure that the people in your community are getting the education they need, because we won't have the great national security leaders we need in 20 years if we're not educating them today. But
Admiral, can I ask you, just from the perspective of military readiness, is there also something, if we think about who's going to be in the services 5, 10, 15 years from now, do you feel like the educational requirements are changing significantly for what it takes?
Yeah, I don't think the educational requirements are changing. The physical standards have had to change because, frankly, there's been this sense that a lot of our young men and women that are eligible to join the military are obese. They've got drug problems, a lot of things that society has not set them up well to be entering the military. But educationally, I think those standards are still the same. And I will tell you, the young men and women that I've had an opportunity to spend time with over the last several years in the military, I mean, they're as good as they get. And anybody that thinks that today's military, that these young men and women are, not as hardworking, not as patriotic, not as courageous, they haven't spent any time with the youth of America. I've said it before, I'm the biggest fan of the millennials and the Gen Z that you'll ever meet, because these are a remarkable generation. And I tell people, look, if you think that they are these soft, entitled little snowflakes, then you've never seen them in a firefight in Afghanistan or going to the University of Texas to make a better life for themselves. I mean, these are great kids, and we ought to be incredibly proud of them for serving the country. I think the military we have is great. Having said that, we do have some problems. We have some problems on enlistment. We have some problems on the military industrial base, and we can certainly talk about those, Ryan.
You know, Admiral, we have, as you know, No Labels puts a lot of work into forging these bipartisan congressional coalitions, working to try to get to solutions, common sense solutions on some key issues. If they were looking into the next Congress, you're thinking about our House Senate members here, and they wanted to focus on some areas of military readiness, military capabilities, what would you tell them would be the areas they should be most focused on and trying to get something done?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two areas. One, you do have to look at the military industrial base. For decades, and this is not any one administration. This goes back, 30, 40, maybe even 50 years in terms of our declining military industrial base, our ability to build, the great ships we need in a timely manner, the great submarines we need, the great aircraft, the tanks, et cetera. There has been kind of a steady decline in our national support to the industrial base. And so we've got to figure out a way. How do you have more shipyards out there? How do you ensure that you're incentivizing those big primes in particular that are building the F-35s, that are building the tanks, the Abrams that we need, that are building the next generation of whatever? We've got to make sure that they have the resources, the understanding, and that we also pressurize them a little bit to say, look, you can't spend, 10 years building the next generation, whatever. We need you to be faster, better, but we also need to invest and find a way that the country's got to invest there. So I think on the hardware side, improving the military industrial base so that we have the military we need to deter the near peer competitors, that's important. I think on the personnel side, right now, and again, I've been out of the military for a while, but I know that personnel costs eat up a lot of the military budget, and rightfully so. We need to make sure these young men and women have the right health care they need, that they get the educational opportunities and the benefits that accrue to them. But we also have to find a way to continue to recruit the best and the brightest. And this means, incentivizing young men and women who are eligible to come in and enlist in the military, or for those young men and women that want to go on and be officers to go to, whether it's one of the service academies or one of the great ROTC units or through the officer candidate school. But we've got to make sure that their salaries are to some degree competitive with the outside world. We've got to make sure that we are incentivizing them so that they see the military as a great place to come, to learn, to get educated, to be part of the camaraderie, and to serve the country. And if we do that, I think we will handle both the physical hardware side and the personnel side. But there, again, everybody says that. It's easy to say, it's just harder to do.
Admiral, I mean, those are, of course, intermediate, longer term projects. You're going to make progress against them over time. I mean, are there other hair on fire challenges that you're a little more concerned about? Meaning, if you were advising the next president as they're coming in next January, say, listen, this is something you better deal with and have an answer to in the coming weeks, months, not over the course of years. What are you most concerned about there?
Yeah, the thing you're always concerned about is military readiness. And the fact that we're not burning out the young sailors, soldiers, airmen, Marines, space officers, enlisted. So military readiness has always got to be first and foremost when it comes to the near-term problems. So this has a lot to do, again, all of this is connected though, Ryan. The fact of the matter is the military readiness is connected to the industrial base, because do you have enough ships? It's also connected to the recruiting. Do you have enough young men and women coming in that you can man the ships and the airplanes and the tanks? But readiness is also a function of, are we training them? Do we have enough money to train them, the operations money we need? Do we have enough locations to train them and deploy them? So in the case of the Navy, that is kind of always in a constant state of deployment, are we deploying them at a rate where they can be deployed for 6 months, come back, have an opportunity to wind down a little bit, spend time with their family, prepare to train up, and make sure that in that same cycle, we are also ensuring that the ships that they're about to get on are ready to go as well. So this readiness issue, it is complex, but that's always a near-term concern for any military leader and should be for the next commander-in-chief.
One thing, obviously, the next president is going to confront is what to do about the situation in Ukraine. And I think one thing that there's just not a lot of clarity on is, what is the end game the United States should be working towards? Now, if you listen to our respective candidates, you, of course, have former President Trump saying he'll end the conflict in a day. Not clear how he'd do that. For her part, you hear Vice President Harris say we're going to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. But neither of them really sets out a marker for what success should look like, either for the Ukrainians or for us. And my question to you is, what should our goal be in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, our goal should be to have the Ukrainians win the war. That's what our goal should be. But there's a reality factor that we have to consider. I mean, right now, we're in a situation, and I was out in Ukraine late last year, had a chance to get down to Odessa, up to Kyiv, down to Lviv. I talked to most of the military commanders, the Minister of Defense, and they talked about positional warfare. Well, positional warfare essentially is a stalemate. And a lot of people like to think about Ukraine, and they see all the drones that are coming into play, and they think of this as some high-tech 21st century war. The reality of the matter is, yes, there is high-tech 21st century war, but there is also World War I taking place here. This is trench warfare. This is artillery bombardments. And to put it in perspective for the folks that are listening, the Russians have already lost, either killed and wounded, I should say, 660,000 soldiers. Now think about that number for just a minute. Of that 660,000, you're probably talking 300,000 plus killed in action. In 10 years of the Vietnam War, we lost 58,000 soldiers. And in 2.5 years of this fight, they have already lost 300,000 or more killed in action and another 300,000 wounded in action. And you know what? Putin doesn't care. He will continue to throw soldiers at the problem. And, as we've evaluated it, he's certainly prepared to lose, 1 million soldiers in combat and keep pressurizing Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine is 1/10 the size of Russia. So they are going to be in this very difficult position of having to fight just the mass that Russia will apply to the problem. What we've seen tactically in the last, several weeks, maybe even the last month, is the Russian pace is picking up in the east. You see they have made some tactical gains. They're pushing hard with their mechanized forces because they know as winter starts to set in, the roads are going to get muddy. It's going to be a little harder to move your tanks and your mobile artillery pieces, so they're pushing hard on that end. At the end, though, those tactical gains don't have much strategic impact. You also see the Ukrainian push into Kursk Oblast, and that's, again, tactically, that's nice, but strategically, it's not really all that significant. So where we are is where we are. And right now, you have the Russians essentially owning the Donbass and what we call the land bridge down to Crimea. I don't see anything the Ukrainians are going to do to break that land bridge and separate the Russians from having that kind of continual approach from Russia down to Crimea. So if they can't achieve any sort of movement there, then what is the long-term expectation or the long-term hopes there? So I think the best we can hope for, either administration, is some level of armistice that says, okay, everybody goes to their neutral corners. Russia, you keep what you have. That will not make Zelensky happy. But if he feels like somebody else has told him to do that, maybe he accepts it. So Russia, you hold what you have. Ukraine, you hold what you've got. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to take the $350 billion from the sanctions. We're going to use that to rebuild Ukraine. We're going to give you some level of security blanket. NATO, maybe, but some level of, at a minimum, some level of bilateral agreement that we say, look, we'll not allow Russia to come back into Ukraine. So an armistice, everybody holds their own ground. We provide Ukraine a security agreement, and then we bring in the money to help build Ukraine. I think that is the best we can hope for, and that's what's going to happen, I think, for either administration at this point in time.
When you say armistice, you mean something modeled on the end of the Korean War, where it doesn't really end,
right,
but it's kind of frozen in place.
I think that's where we're going. Nobody is going to accept defeat. So Zelensky is not going to say, I accept the fact that the Russians are holding part of Ukraine. He won't agree to that, nor would I. And of course, Russia, frankly, will be happy because Putin moved the goalposts. If you remember from at the beginning of the invasion, he was going to come into Ukraine, take over Ukraine, throw Zelensky out, and basically, run you and again bring Ukraine back into the Russian fold from his standpoint. That, of course, didn't happen. So he immediately moved the goalposts and said, well, what I really wanted to do was just take the Donbass and have that land bridge. So Putin will be able to claim victory, unfortunately, in this scenario, this armistice scenario. But at least it also doesn't put Zelensky in the position where he has said, I cede, eastern Ukraine to the Russians. He doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to ever admit that that is Russian territory. So yes, it would be something similar to what we had on the Korean Peninsula.
I want to ask you how you think the next president should think about some of these things, because obviously you have the situation in the Middle East, you have Russia, you have China. On the one hand, those are independent theaters. On the other hand, a lot of people think they're not independent. It's really all connected. Are you of the view that the starting point the United States has to begin from is that Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea are allied together to try to undermine us everywhere they can, and that is the assumption from which we need to start? Or is that analysis misplaced?
No, I don't think that analysis is misplaced, but I think there's a broader context even above that. And that is America prepared to lead in the world? Does the world need U.S. leadership? And of course, my contention is absolutely. If we are not out there leading, then who is going to take up the banner? Are we going to allow the Chinese to lead? Are we going to allow the Russians to lead? How is it going to look if we're not out there, at the forefront of a lot of these difficult engagements? Now, I understand. People say, look, it costs us a lot of money. It could cost us our blood and treasure with our young men and women, all of that. But the world will look entirely different if the U.S. is not leading. So, if a new administration comes in and says, look, we're backing out of Ukraine, we're not going to support them, then what does that tell autocrats like Xi and others that think, well, look, all we have to do is wait out the West, i.e. wait out the United States. And if the U.S. isn't going to lead in supporting Ukraine, if we're not going to lead in the Middle East, if we're not going to lead in the Pacific, what are our plans for leading the world? So you have to start with there. I think you have to start with that point. Now, to your point, yes, when you take a look at Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, other bad actors, you bet they are becoming a bloc. Now, they are not necessarily an ideological bloc. There's a lot of ideological differences, but they are certainly this kind of coalition of the willing bad guys. And we're going to have to look at them that way. I mean, you see that now we have North Korean soldiers fighting in Russia. Obviously, Iran has supplied a lot of the drones, the Shahed drones, to the Russians. So they are all collaborating in a way that will not be good for Western democracies or Western allies.
I want to ask you, Admiral, about our country's financial position, because I think one of the things it's dawning on people is suddenly this week, last 2 weeks, you've seen some action in treasury markets where yields on government debt seems to be going a little bit higher, with a lot of commentators thinking it's on the expectation that we have no feasible plan to deal with our debt and deficits. On the other hand, what you just described is that the United States is facing a period where it doesn't have much of a choice, in your view, but to be very engaged around the world.
Yeah.
So we have a lot to do, and yet we are resource constrained. How are you supposed to square this circle?
Yeah, you square this circle by making sure that we have strong alliances in Southeast Asia to be able to deter China. But what does that do? It allows freedom of navigation in Southeast Asia and in the Pacific, which means that commerce is going to flow. We make sure that the Straits of Hormuz stays open so LNG can flow. So the idea that we're going to be forward is not contrary to the fact that, yes, we have an incredibly high debt. We need to do something about the debt. But at the same time, if we withdraw and we find that both the military power and the economic power of the United States isn't as strong because we have withdrawn behind our borders, we're going to find that debt actually higher, because I think we're going to find the trade deficits a little bit more problematic, and people willing to kind of follow us economically will be challenging. So I do believe you have to have a strong military and a strong presence. And this means a diplomatic presence, an economic presence. All the levers of national power need to be put forward so that we can be economically strong, so we can figure out a way to begin to reduce that debt. But I don't think that they are necessarily contradictory positions.
I have a final question for you before we open it up to question. And it's this idea of just your judgment of where America sits in the world today. And certainly there's a lot of commentary to suggest that with our internal divisions and the rise of these other countries, that people feel like we're a nation in decline. Certainly the poll data suggests that. On the other hand, if you open up this week's edition of The Economist magazine, the cover says, America's economy is the envy of the world. And yet, so once again, there's this new technology, AI, and we're out in front and we're leading the charge. And so there are these different data points you can pick up and tell whatever story you want to tell. Which one is most convincing to you right now about where America stands relative to everybody else?
Yeah, America is absolutely not in decline. And I don't say that because I am the ultimate optimist, which I am. But the fact of the matter is, our economy, to the economist's point, is the envy of the world. Our military is the envy of the world. Now, we've had some missteps in the last couple of decades. Let's be clear about that. But the fact of the matter is, everybody wants to know how we as a military, how we as a nation continue to have a strong economy, because we're a nation that believes in freedom. We're a nation that applauds and incentivizes innovation. We aren't like China, where we are applying industrial policies that somehow begin to hamper people's innovation. So the economy is strong because we're a country based on freedom, and that freedom drives creativity. It drives innovation. Yes, it drives a lot of other things that some people may not like, but at the end of the day, it is what makes us the envy of the world. And as long as people in America believe they are free, that they are free to express their ideas, that they are free to build on their lives, that they have the resources they need to fulfill the American dream, then we are always going to be the envy of the world. And I will tell you, I've traveled all around the world. And a lot of times I go places, and yes, people do not like the United States politics or policies. But boy, they will come to the United States in a heartbeat, because they know they can have a better life for them and their families. And as long as we don't lose that, and I don't think we will, we're always going to be the envy of the world, whether it's our economy or our military. But at the end of the day, it's our ideas. It is the idea of America that makes us the envy of the world.
Thanks, Admiral. Nice hopeful note to end that section on. Mind if we go to some questions? Let's start with Mary Beth. Mary Beth, go ahead.
I thank you for being here, Admiral.
Sure.
America needs the right kind of leadership right now, and the two parties we have are not delivering it. What will it take, in your opinion, to attract someone like you to run for the White House as an independent?
Yeah. I think part of it is that the whole campaigning process has gotten so ugly. The truth doesn't seem to matter much anymore. And if you had one little problem when you were in elementary school, somehow that gets blown out of proportion. So I think the hard part, for the people, the good people that are out there wanting to run for office, is, are they prepared to put their family through that crucible? And that's, everybody's got to make that individual choice. And then of course the question becomes, well, yes, I'm prepared to put my family through that. But I want to make sure that if I do that, I'm in a position to win, so that it hasn't been for nothing. These are tough choices, I think, for anybody that is putting themselves in a position to run for, Republican, Democrat, or independent.
Thank you. Elena, go ahead. Elena, you on mute?
Oh yeah, unmuted.
There we go.
I got all these messages sitting here. Hello, Admiral.
Oh, Elena, how are you?
I just want to tell you, I was so excited to learn about you, and then I was a big proponent of yours in the no labels scheme of things. And with the crazy stuff that has happened since, no labels basically, withdrew, it's just been crazy. And I just think about you all the time. Don't tell your wife. All right?
Okay, we'll keep that between you and me and the other 429 people that are on this
Right.
the Zoom.
Now I'm here sitting in the civics class that I teach at a girls' high school, and they're all in the back there. They can wave. They are Gen Z. You are, right? And we had a little 10-minute video on foreign policy the last class, so they'd be ready to be able to understand who you are. And I think I want to ask a question that actually will help them, if you don't mind.
No.
We learned about there's the State Department and the Defense Department.
Right.
And, you know, they're very interested in specifically the war that's going on and the multiple fronts that Israel is fighting. The question is, everybody says they want to go in and out quickly. That's the best way to win any war, in and out quickly. And how does the State Department versus the Defense Department sort of, do they argue and make a case before the president? How does the president decide what they're going to be doing? You know, take us into the what's that room called?
Situation room.
Situation room. Yes.
There you go. Well, yeah, no, it's a great question, Elena, and your students are thoughtful to ask it. Yeah, so in a situation where a president of the United States is looking to make a decision on whether or not he or she is going to go to war, they pull together. The president will pull together what we refer to as the Principals Committee, that then becomes the National Security Council. Okay, so the National Security Council includes Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, the Director of National Intelligence, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is a member, and then there are other folks that are invited in, depending upon what the issue is. Other cabinet level positions. And yes, the president will get advice from the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is the senior military advisor to the president of the United States. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff will be very, very careful not to express their opinion on going to war. What they will do is they will give the president their best military advice. So if the president says, we want to go into country X and defeat bad guy X, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff will say, Mr. President, this is the way we need to do it militarily. Now, the chairman will not advocate for going to war. That decision will be left up to the president. The Secretary of Defense, of course, is a political appointee and is in a much better position to give his or her opinion on whether or not it is right to go to war. And then again, the Secretary of State, from the State Department standpoint, from the relationships, if you think of state as soft power and defense as hard power, this is the nature of how they both work. But I will tell you, again, having spent a lot of time around the world, there are some remarkable ambassadors and foreign service officers out there, and they do great and noble and patriotic work for the country. They don't get near the credit that they deserve. And they are, if you're in a country, the U.S. ambassador is the president's representative. We, the military, will work with the U.S. ambassador. But at the end of the day, the U.S. ambassador gets the final vote in a country. And I wish that your students will go on and serve in the State Department or serve with the Department of Defense. I think they'll find that worthwhile experience.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elena. I want to go next to Seth Cropsey. Seth actually has been a guest of ours on No Labels Talks before, regularly writes for the Wall Street Journal. Seth, you have a question.
Bill, do you think that a security guarantee is possible, achievable in the West, that would keep any agreement to end the war in Ukraine along the lines that you suggested intact? And if so, for how long? Which is to say, you think Putin would be content with that over a long period?
Well, first, Seth, let me say it's great to see you again. It's been a long time. I hope you're doing well. Yeah. This is where, back to, I think if anybody, Trump or Harris, is going to come in and negotiate some level of armistice, both sides are going to have to get something, and both sides are going to have to lose something. In the case of Putin, if he feels like he has won the terrain battle and gets to hold on to the Donbass down to the Crimea, that is his win. His loss, of course, would be if we have some level of agreement, security agreement for Ukraine. Now, Bill McRaven thinks we ought to bring Ukraine into NATO. That would be a tough sell for Putin. But to your point, Seth, if we have a bilateral agreement, I don't think Zelensky would accept a bilateral agreement because I don't think he would feel that is strong enough. But if you bring, or at least if you put Ukraine on a path to be a member of NATO, I think that would give the Ukrainians a lot more confidence that this is a this is an agreement that will hold water if Russia threatens again, because it would not be wise, obviously, under Article 5 for Putin to decide he's going to come back into Ukraine and then have all of NATO at his doorstep.
Thanks, Admiral. Noel, you have a question.
Hi there. Sorry, I wasn't able to unmute myself. Thank you so much for your service, Admiral.
Pleasure.
Admiral, former President Trump wouldn't send money to Ukraine to defend against Putin. He demonstrated that he doesn't understand the strategic reasons of our security alliances beyond a, dollars and cents, very myopic understanding. And so what I don't understand is why would any American, believe that he would be a friend to Israel? And I'm wondering, how does the military see this scenario playing out? And then secondarily, on the operational level, the attacks on Hezbollah, their pagers specifically, demonstrated Israel's ability to blend their cyber capabilities with the ability to insert explosives into hardware at the commercial supply chain level. And so from your perspective, what should this imply to us about the changing nature of warfare? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. You've asked a lot of great questions there, Noel, complicated ones. But, in terms of the military, look, the fact of the matter is the military works for whoever the commander-in-chief is. And if President Trump becomes the commander-in-chief, then the military, rightfully so, will salute smartly and do what the commander-in-chief asks them to do as long as those orders are lawful. When they are no longer lawful, then the military establishment or the officers in charge have got an obligation not to follow an unlawful order. So if President Trump says, hey, we're going to withdraw all of our troops from NATO, he cannot leave NATO. Congress has put an amendment in place that prevents that, but he could withdraw all the troops from Europe, for example. He has that right as the commander-in-chief. Now, I can tell you that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would push back on that and explain why we need to stay engaged with NATO. But in terms of the military, I can tell you in 37 years, the military, having worked for X number of presidents, I never once wondered whether or not they were Democrats or Republicans. They were the commander-in-chief, and my job was to follow the orders of the commander-in-chief through the chain of command. And I think that's going to occur no matter who the president is. In terms of Israel, I mean, this was a pretty sophisticated intelligence coup. Obviously, you talked about disrupting the supply chain. A lot of countries have the ability to do that, but it is tricky. It is hard. And again, I can't go into a lot of detail because I have some insights into probably how that happened. But the real question becomes, why did they initiate the pagers and the walkie-talkies at the time they did? I think there's probably two scenarios. One is that somebody dropped a pager, and then when they opened it up, they found out, look, there's a small explosive device in there. Or Hezbollah was getting ready to conduct a major attack, and the Israelis knew that this would disrupt their command and control. I think the latter is more likely. What does it say about the state of the future of warfare? It says that, look, we're going to get more and more sophisticated as we go into the future. But at the end of the day, and I'll go back to Russia and Ukraine, at the end of the day, warfare is still hard, brutal, one man or woman killing another man or woman and occupying the space on which they stand. That is what ends war. When people kill more people than they lose. And that is just a fact that, warfare has not changed in the last 10,000 years. And all of the high tech, all of the drones, all the AI, is not going to change the fact that until you start killing more of your adversaries and beat them into submission, that's how war is going to continue to be defined.
Thank you, Admiral. Jeffrey.
Thank you. Bill, first of all, congratulations again on your article in the Wall Street Journal, your op-ed in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, which somebody may have mentioned before. That I thought was a remarkable statement of statesmanship. So I'm going to ask you about what worries you. And I'm going to ask you about it in two parts.
All right.
There have been a mention of a number of different conflicts throughout the world, or hotspots throughout the world, or the potential for cooperation among unfriendly nations who represent a threat to us. Which of those worries you the most over the next 3 years and why? And the second worry question I have for you relates to the question about, I think you talked about the constitutional responsibilities of the military. What happens if the next president, I have one particular in mind, asks the military to do something in the United States or instructs them to do something in the United States, which they believe is unlawful? How do they make that decision? And what happens, what's the consequence of that disagreement between the military and the presidency?
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. As always, good to see you, and thanks for the thoughtful questions. Let me start with the second question first. The military, of course, has an army of lawyers as well. So if the president of the United States, in his capacity as commander in chief, directs the military to put down a riot in the streets of pick a place, the president will have to initiate, in some ways, the Insurrection Act. He will have to have a legal mechanism whereby the active duty military can, in fact, be brought to bear against the U.S. citizenry. That is a very, very high bar to get over. And so as the chairman and the military leaders, if you see something that you know is illegal, well, then you don't have to follow it. But the hard part is there's always that gray area where you say, I don't know, this is just something I can't bring myself to do. Well, the good news is you can resign. And the fact, we talk about this all the time as senior officers, we talk about the stars on your shoulders. You can take your stars off and throw them on the table and say, thank you very much. I know that this is technically a legal order, but it's not an order I'm prepared to follow, and therefore I'm resigning. And I think if there was an order initiated by a president against the American people that they felt was not lawful or bordered on an unlawful order, then I think you would have a number of senior military leaders say, I'm not going to follow that order. In terms of the trouble spots around the world and kind of what concerns me, I do go back to Russia and Ukraine. Obviously, the Middle East is in a horrific state right now as Israel is fighting on multiple fronts. The horrible and unfortunate death of so many innocent civilians. It is a difficult place. But I don't see that expanding much beyond where it is now. Obviously, the Israeli strike on Iran here, a couple of days ago or a week or so ago, I mean, they hit 20 different sites, 3 different waves. It was pretty impressive. It didn't really significantly damage the Iranian military structure. We'll see what Iran does to come back. But I still think, having spent a lot of time in the Middle East, that as strange as this sounds, all the actors in the Middle East seem to know how far they can push things before they have to stop. You saw Netanyahu did not go after the nuclear power plants. He didn't go after the oil. He went after military complexes and structures. So I remain concerned about Russia and Ukraine, and for a number of reasons. One, I do think it reflects not only U.S. leadership, but Western leadership. If we fail Ukraine, and again, we may not have a choice but to drive for an armistice, but if we just pull out and we decide we're no longer going to support Ukraine with aid, with the U.S. Imprimatur, then I think that reflects a lot on U.S. leadership. And then that may, in fact, incentivize Putin to look at something else. Does he go after a Moldova? Does he go after an Estonia? Even if the Article 5 comes into play, is he prepared to test some of that? I think that potential is slim, but it's not zero. And you're talking about a major war on the European continent. This is something that ought to continue to scare a lot of people. It certainly frightens me because I just don't know, one, how this war ends and whether or not it continues to expand, and its reflection on U.S. leadership. So Russia and Ukraine continue to concern me.
Thank you, Admiral. Tyler, question.
Hello. Thank you, Admiral, for your service and for being here today. My biggest concern in recent years has been what I've watched and learned about Taiwan and China's. My understanding is that Taiwan is the apple of Xi Jinping's eye, and he stated repeatedly by the end of his term he intends to bring it back into the Chinese fold. And everything I understand about military readiness is that even if we were to react quickly, it would be nigh impossible for us to mount a significant defense with how close Taiwan is to China. So my question is, how do we, and the other piece I look at is that with everything else going on in the world, Xi Jinping is watching and learning, and we've essentially kind of a way divided our attention. So you talked a lot about military readiness, and he's been watching very closely how we adjust to these other things in the world, especially as he's kind of in cahoots, for lack of a better word, with these operators. So how do we deter China, which continues to build out in the South China Sea, and really try and deter this action, which we know is, in Xi Jinping's mind, is inevitable in the next at least decade?
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. I was out in Taiwan again late last year and had an opportunity, frankly, to go walk the beaches of Taiwan because I wanted to see. There's been a lot of talk, as you mentioned, about the Chinese coming across the Straits of Taiwan, about 80, 90 miles across. Can they do a major amphibious landing, land on Taiwan, take Taipei? I will tell you that will be very, very difficult for the Chinese if the Taiwanese decide that they're going to try and defend themselves. The beaches are not large, and from a military standpoint, for the Chinese to get into major Taipei, into the center of Taipei, you come through a very channelized area. Once again, I think the Taiwanese could defend themselves. Not that they would be 100% successful, but it would be a bloody, bloody battle for the Chinese. For us, we understand how that amphibious operation would have to take place. We are investing a lot in the submarine fleet because we know that the submarine fleet right now, even in the Straits of Taiwan, could be very effective against a large-scale Chinese invasion. The Chinese know that as well. But the best way to really to deter China is to make sure we continue to build relationships, with the Japanese, with the South Koreans, with the Filipinos, with the Taiwanese, and, oh, by the way, with our allies in Southeast Asia. So we build an economic bloc that makes it too expensive for China to decide they're going to do a major military invasion. Now, frankly, I don't think they would do a military invasion. I think what they would start with is a blockade of some sort. Now, a full blockade is, in fact, an act of war. So if they blockaded it, the United Nations would say this is an act of war. That would begin to trigger a lot of things. But they don't have to do a full blockade. They could stop one ship coming, and then two ships coming, and then three ships coming. And at some point in time, it's the slow boiling of the frog. You begin to apply so much pressure to Taiwan, and then, the ability to apply political pressure, et cetera. Now, the fact of the matter is the Chinese continue to be one of Taiwan's largest trading partners. So I think what Xi wants to do, and again, he said to his military, you need to be prepared to go by 27. That's just prepared to go. That doesn't mean we're going to go by 27. But the fact of the matter is, I think he's going to try to solve this problem, maybe not peacefully, but not with a full-scale military invasion. He will try some political maneuvering. He will try pressure, economic pressure, and other things to try to get the Taiwanese to be more aligned to the mainland. Xi's got so many problems right now with the demographics. The GDP is only growing at about 2.5%. You look at the problems in the real estate, the industrial policies he's having to put in place. I think he's focused enough right now on the domestic issues not to worry about Taiwan, other than in some of his large scale speeches.
Thank you, Admiral. You've been so generous with your time. We just have a single final question, and then we'll close it up. Bill, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Admiral, it's good to see you. And thanks again for your service, both in the Navy and at the University of Texas. So my question for you is back to the war in Ukraine. From your point of view, is there anything that we're not doing today that we could do that would make a material difference in Ukraine's ability to be successful?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Good to see you again. Hard to say. The issue really for the Ukrainians, I've been pretty critical of the Biden administration in terms of the kind of disastrous evacuation out of Afghanistan. I actually think they have handled Ukraine reasonably well. Now, they could have been a little quicker on the uptake. We could have provided more arms and ammunition to the Ukrainians quicker. But the issue right now, I think the only thing that would change the battlefield is whether or not we basically unleash them and say, look, you can use the ATACMS, you can use the F-16s, you can use whatever tools we give you to strike into Russia. Now, there had been some concern that if we did that, then Putin's been doing a lot of nuclear saber rattling. Could that potentially put us in a position to, jump to nuclear war? I don't think so, because what you've seen is the Ukrainians have pushed into Kursk. I mean, they've got a major salient there in Kursk, and the Russians don't seem to be overly concerned about that. The Ukrainians have fired ATACMS into certain areas, close in around the Russian border. We haven't seen a huge backlash from Putin. So I think if we want to put the Ukrainians really in a better negotiating position, now Zelensky would say he's not ready to negotiate yet, but you do want to put him in a position, if we're going to find some way to have an armistice, to be in a stronger position to negotiate. And I think the best way we could do that is to say, look, whatever weapon systems we give you or our allies give you, you can use those to strike targets, military targets you think are of value that will, help you tactically and maybe strategically. At this point in time, I think that's probably about the best we can do. Again, along with continuing to provide them the funds and the ammunition we're doing now to keep pressurizing Russia.
Admiral.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, it's been my pleasure. Thank you all for joining me.
Really appreciate it. Admiral Bill McRaven, decorated military career, public leader, and somebody we all really admire. Appreciate you sharing your perspective, and hope maybe after the election, you can come back and join us again.
Hey, thanks very much. It's been great joining you all today. Take care.
Thank you, Admiral. Everybody, thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next week on No Labels Talks.